Hi, my name is Morley Robbins. I'm the wellness coach here at Chiropractic First. As I've mentioned in some other videos, I'm a recovering hospital executive who's seen the light. And I'm very committed to helping people learn more about what it takes to be healthy. And there's one topic that I'm particularly mindful of because I grew up in a family that had a lot of heart disease. So I've done a lot of reading about it, been very mindful of it throughout my 57 years here on the planet. But I read a book recently that really caught my eye and certainly challenged me to see things very differently. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to do so. It's called The Great Cholesterol Con. And it's written by an individual by the name of Anthony Colpo. He's actually just another citizen. He's actually a resident of Australia. And he got into this because his father died of heart disease after taking statins, and he couldn't figure that one out. And he has personally read all 1,800 studies that have been done that remotely address the topic of cholesterol and its link to heart disease. Let me just read you a couple bullet points from his introduction, which I think are pretty astonishing. Of the numerous controlled clinical trials examining dietary interventions for heart disease prevention, none had ever demonstrated a beneficial effect of saturated fat restriction. Fascinating. None. Of the 26 long-term studies monitoring selected populations for the occurrence of heart disease, only four were able to demonstrate even a desperately weak association between saturated fat and heart disease. Which really begs the question, why are we eating a low-fat diet? It's fascinating when you really get into it. And it's all a result of an individual by the name of Ancel Keys. He was a famous physiologist. He was responsible for developing K rations during the Second World War and carried a lot of sway. But what you may not know is that he developed that theory in the early 50s and did a lot of research, and then towards the end of his career realized he may have made a big mistake. In 1987, he wrote an article in the New York Times. I don't know, I think that's a pretty big paper, but it was a letter to the New York Times, basically saying that he thinks there's too much fuss being made about cholesterol. Well, this was about the time that statins were being really hyped in 1987. 4 years later, when he was 91 years old, he was born in 1900. 4 years later, he wrote an article in the New England Journal of Medicine. It doesn't get any bigger than that. That is the Bible of medical research. And in the article, he's profiling a patient of his who ate 25 eggs a day and was just fine, thank you very much. And he makes a rather sterling observation. He says, "We have known all along that cholesterol in blood has no relationship to cholesterol in the diet." We've known all along? I didn't know that. Did you know that? We've known all along that there's no relationship, and yet they want us to have this low-fat diet. So I had an opportunity to attend a healthcare meeting recently. It was a favor to a client of ours here at the center. And it was sponsored by Kellogg School of Management. And it was the focus of the breakfast meeting was on the future of healthcare. Very distinguished panel of experts. There were 6 people. I knew several of them, having been in the field for 35 years. But the individual who was the cardiac surgeon, I'd never met, but he was from the Chicago area. And so people asked their perfunctory questions about Obamacare and what's going to happen. And towards the end of the Q&A period, I raised my hand. And I had an opportunity to pose this question to this cardiac surgeon. And what I did was asked if he knew who Ancel Keys was, and he nodded, and he said he did. And then I proceeded to read those 2 quotes that I've just shared with you. And I posed the question, "So, Dr. So-and-so, my question to you is, what's the future of healthcare? And more importantly, what's the future of cardiac care when the public finds out that it's all been one big con. And he was somewhat stunned by the question. And he said, well, that's a difficult question. I said, I know it is. What's the answer? And he took a deep breath and he said, first of all, I want you to know that I agree with you about cholesterol. I was sort of stunned by that. I turned around and looked at the 110 people behind me who were shaking their head in disbelief that he had just said that. And then he proceeded to talk a little bit more, and he said, and this is what I think is particularly poignant. He said, what you need to understand is that this is a really big business, and we've decided not to rock the boat. Wow. We've decided not to rock the boat. I turned around again, and people's jaws were hitting the table. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. And so he talked a little bit further, and then he said, but let me answer your question directly. He said, I don't know. And I had an opportunity to touch base with him after the meeting, and I thanked him for his candor. I said, what you don't know is that I was the guy that wrote the strategic plan for the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, of which he was a member, in the year 2000, and predicted that the field of bypass surgery would pretty much be gone by 2010. And he said, well, you weren't too far off, were you? So I think it's for those of you who might be worried about heart disease, for those of you who are worried about what you're eating, for those of you who might be asked to take certain drugs, I think you need to do some more research. And we've got a lot of good information here. We'll be happy to sit down with you, go over your diet. We've got a very detailed intake form that can get down to some very important metabolic processes in your body and really work with you to identify what is it you really need to be including in your diet and what's the best way to make sure that you're staying on top of that particular issue. So thank you for your time and look forward to hearing from you at your convenience.